Amelia and David's story began, as many do, at a lively senior class mixer in the spring of their final year. The university's common room buzzed with laughter, and sparkling drinks flowed generously from punch bowls. Amelia, a diligent English Lit major, couldn't help but notice the lavishness of the affair. Many of the other young women had arrived in glittering cocktail, their makeup bold and dramatic, but it was Amelia, in her unassuming elegance, whom David, a thoughtful engineering student, seemed to notice. He navigated the crowded room with an easy smile, settling into the armchair beside her, offering her a fresh glass of sparkling cider. Amelia's head felt light, a pleasant hum from the lively atmosphere, but she took the glass, thanking David with a genuine smile. From that memorable night, their connection deepened quickly. A week later, David invited Amelia to a quiet art house cinema, and a few days after that, to a vibrant street art festival downtown. They spent hours simply talking, and Amelia didn't even realise she was falling in love. David was unlike any young man she'd ever dated. So, when he proposed a few months later, on a peaceful autumn afternoon by the lake, she didn't hesitate for a single second. She knew, deep in her soul, her answer would be an unequivocal yes. Her mother, ever practical and prone to worry, had tried gently to dissuade her. "Amelia, darling, why rush? You haven't even truly started your careers, haven't built up anything yet. You're fresh out of college. You don't even have steady positions." "Mum," Amelia sighed, a familiar weariness in her voice, "please don't start. When you and Dad got married, were you both completely established? I think you practically eloped to the courthouse as freshmen." "But that was a different era, sweetheart," her mother insisted, her voice softening with nostalgia. "You could simply live together to get to know each other better," her mother offered, a last tentative suggestion. Amelia laughed, a bright, clear sound. "Mum, I hardly recognise you. You were always so traditional. You always said there should be no living together before marriage, only a proper wedding. I guess you've simply broadened your perspective." "And I have too," Amelia nodded, her smile tender. "And now, I don't believe in jumping in marriage with both feet." The newlyweds found a charming, slightly older apartment in a quiet, tree-lined neighbourhood and immediately began setting aside funds for a future down payment on a home. Children weren't in their immediate plans until they had their own space. It wasn't the right time for either of them to step away from their fledgling careers. They needed to establish themselves financially. They opened a dedicated savings account, into which they diligently deposited a portion of every paycheck. Slowly, steadily, their nest egg grew. Amelia knew, that with their shared determination everything would work out. Only good things awaited them, nothing less. Their parents, from both families, generously contributed to their honeymoon, and they chose a romantic escape to the coast of Maine. The rugged beauty of the rocky slopes, the endless expanse of the Atlantic, took their breath away. Over 10 glorious days they explored charming lighthouses, quaint fishing villages, and enjoyed fresh seafood. One bright morning, as they sailed under the billowing crimson sails of a classic schooner, a playful pod of dolphins appeared in the sparkling emerald waters. They gracefully swam alongside the boat, leaping and diving as if competing in a joyous race, their sleek wet backs glistening in the sun. Amelia gripped the polished wooden railing, watching them with pure wonder, her heart soaring with a joy so profound it almost hurt. "Look, David!" Amelia exclaimed, pointing with childlike wonder. "That must be a family, a mama, a papa, and 2 little dolphin calves." "There are more," David chuckled, pulling her closer. The salty breeze, characteristic of the Maine coast, caressed their sun-warmed skin, carrying the invigorating tang of the ocean. Splashes of cool water misted their faces. Amelia squeezed her eyes shut, laughing, wrapping her arms around her husband's shoulders. She never imagined such pure, unadulterated happiness was possible. During their honeymoon, every detail captivated her. The quaint guest houses where they rested, the comfortable linen shorts she wore to the beach, the charming little cafes serving delicious seafood, and the narrow shaded streets of the small coastal towns. And then, watching the dolphins dance through the waves, holding David's hand, Amelia felt a profound certainty. This was how they would navigate life, hand in hand, united by a common purpose, a world of harmony and understanding. Returning to the familiar greyness of their hometown felt heavy, and Amelia boarded their flight with a pang of reluctance. "We'll come back here again, won't we?" she asked David repeatedly, her voice laced with longing. He smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Of course, my love," he assured her. "Of course we will." Back home, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Amelia secured a promising entry-level position as an editor at a small publishing house, a role that promised modest pay but offered an excellent foundation for her career. She remained optimistic, confident that everything would fall into place. David worked as an electrical engineer for the city's public transport system, his income slightly above average. 2 years into their marriage, Amelia's beloved grandmother Eliza passed away. Amelia grieved deeply, feeling as though a piece of her own heart had fractured. She adored her grandmother, a sweet, kind soul with a wonderfully wrinkled face and an immense, generous spirit, who had lived through the tumult of the Great Depression and served bravely during the war effort. One small comfort was that Grandma Eliza had lived a long life, filled with many cherished moments. Her only regret, as she often vocalized, was not seeing her great-grandchildren. "Once you have a little one," Grandma Eliza would often say, her voice a gentle rasp, "then I can finally rest." "Oh, Grandma," Amelia would protest with a laugh, "don't talk like that. You'll still be here to bounce them on your knee. We're going to live to be ancient together." "My dear Amelia, you forget how old I am," Grandma Eliza would retort, having just celebrated her 100th birthday. Amelia would laugh, assuring her that people lived even longer these days. But Grandma Eliza would simply sigh, her fragile eyelids fluttering closed. "I'm tired, my sweet. I want to be with your Grandpa Thomas. How is he doing without me?" She never lived to see the birth of a great-grandchild. The first few days after her passing, Amelia spent at Grandma Eliza's small cottage just outside of town. It was a modest house, tucked away, but boasting a sprawling yard overflowing with raspberry, chokeberry and blackberry bushes, alongside mature apple, pear and cherry trees. In her later years, Grandma Eliza hadn't the strength to tend to them, and the garden had grown wild and exuberant. Amelia spent hours sifting through old dusty cabinets with warped wooden doors that smelled of aged paper and forgotten memories. On one door hung a darkened antique mirror. Inside, stacked in neat piles, were linens, lovingly parched sheets, worn towels and embroidered tablecloths. Grandma Eliza, a child of lean times, never threw anything away. In the high reaches of the pantry, Amelia discovered a delicate tea set and countless mismatched plates and pots. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the tarnished metal. This was her beloved. "Rest well, Grandma," Amelia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "With Grandpa Thomas." By will, the little cottage passed entirely to Amelia. She processed all the necessary paperwork, becoming its legal heir. Amelia had no desire to sell the house. It was a tangible piece of her grandmother's memory, a cherished link to the past. David, however, persistently argued that they didn't need it. Several heated arguments erupted between them. "Why do we need it?" David would exclaim, his voice rising in frustration. "It just sits there, falling into disrepair. Who's going to live in it? Us? Do you want to move to a rural area? It's not exactly rural, it's more of a suburb, Amelia would counter gently, though her patience was wearing thin. But we still won't live there, David insisted. Do you want to spend your weekends digging around in a garden? Not necessarily the garden, Amelia replied, her voice remarkably calm. But the lot is quite large. We could renovate the house and move in. I think it's better to sell it, David countered. It would be enough for a down payment on a new mortgage. No, David, no, I won't sell it. Grandma lived there, Mum grew up there. That house is a part of my family history. Fine, have it your own way. David seethed, but you'll regret it later. I won't, Amelia replied, her voice firm. After these arguments, they sometimes wouldn't speak for days. Amelia refused to be the first to reconcile, believing she wasn't in the wrong. The house was hers by law and hers alone, and she would decide its fate. David's attitude baffled and hurt her. They had started with nothing, building their life from scratch, and now that she had inherited something, he immediately seemed intent on controlling or monetizing it. The unspoken hurt festered, digging its venomous tendrils deeper into Amelia's heart. Arguments became more frequent, sharper. Amelia often cried into her pillow, debating with herself, yet stubbornly holding her ground. She wouldn't sell the house, not ever, period. Sometimes she'd escape to the cottage for entire weekends, spending the time in solitary contemplation. David wouldn't call. The only sounds were the rhythmic tick-tock of the antique grandfather clock and the rustling whisper of wind through the fruit trees outside. Sunday evenings brought her back to the city. David would be in the kitchen preparing a simple dinner, the television humming softly in the living room. Amelia would drop her weekend bag onto the upholstered ottoman in the entryway. I'm home, she'd announce, her voice often sounding too bright, too forced. Good, David would reply, his tone flat, devoid of warmth. Still spending time at your grandma's place? Yes, I was, and it's grandma's home, not just the grandma's place. What's the difference? He'd emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. By the way, my work schedule just changed. They've added night shifts, so I'm heading in tonight. Night shifts? Why now? Amelia asked, surprised. Management's decision, David replied, his voice clipped. The maintenance crews are working overnight also now, so I'll be supervising them. Are you hungry? I made that pasta dish you like. No, thank you, I'm not hungry, Amelia declined, a cold knot forming in her stomach. An unsettling thought struck her. The warmth, the tenderness, the deep understanding they once shared, it was fading, and Amelia quickly pushed it away. Anyway, I'll be earning more, David continued, oblivious to her internal turmoil. They're paying extra for night work. His salary did indeed increase, by a significant 50%. Amelia's income, however, remained stagnant, even though she was in her third year at the publishing house. She tried several times to discuss a raise with her superior, but he always evaded a direct answer. So Amelia began to consider looking for a new job. The rift between Amelia and David deepened with each passing day. They drifted relentlessly apart, like two ships lost at sea. Amelia searched, but no longer found the familiar understanding in her husband's eyes. Arguments flared more frequently, heartfelt conversations became rarer, and warm, cosy evenings together were replaced by a chilling silence and a growing emptiness. Amelia couldn't comprehend why David had changed so profoundly. What was the cause? He never answered her direct questions, and each time she tried to talk about it, he would either abruptly change the subject or simply shut down the conversation. Only once did he respond, reluctantly. It's that house of yours. I just don't understand why we need it. We could turn it into a weekend retreat, Amelia suggested, a hopeful note in her voice.
A retreat? For what? To drive all that way just to pull weeds from a garden? No thanks.
And to grill outdoors, enjoy nature? Amelia persisted softly. David was silent for a moment, then sighed, a sound filled with weariness.
We don't even have children yet. We've been married for 4 years, you know, and we've only saved half of what we need to buy our apartment. And we agreed, if you recall, no children until we owned our own apartment. So we're back where we started. Why do we need a house in the country when we could sell it and buy an apartment?
Amelia didn't answer. She didn't want to go over the same ground again, to turn empty words into endless arguments. They had discussed it 1,000,000 times, arriving at no resolution. Why start all over again? She retreated to the kitchen, and when David got out for a night shift again, she called her friend Kate. They spoke for a long time on the phone, Amelia pouring out her heart about the icy atmosphere at home, David's baffling behaviour, and her own frayed nerves. I can't live like this any more, Kate. I just can't. We've become like strangers, eating meals together, and that's where our entire relationship ends. Sometimes the thought about divorce creeps in, Amelia admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I mean, what's the point of clinging to this? What's the meaning if it's just going to continue like this? Maybe you just need a break. Amelia sighed, closing her eyes, pressing her fingers against her throbbing temples. I wish I could go to the ocean. David promised to take me again, but it never happened. Let's go together, Kate suggested, her voice brightening. Just you and me. We'll soak up the sun, come back refreshed and rested. I haven't been anywhere in ages either. Let's do it, Amelia agreed after a moment of hesitation, a flicker of hope in her voice. Maybe it'll help me clear my head. I'm so tired, Kate. You have no idea how utterly exhausted I am. Oh, I can imagine. Honestly, I'd be worn out too. The more I think about it, the more I'm leaning towards divorce. David wants to sell Grandma's house, and that's a piece of her memory. You understand? Is he really that greedy? You know, dear, sometimes a person's true nature just emerges after years of marriage. The mask slips, so to speak, and you see the true face. Kate chuckled darkly. Oh, God forbid, Amelia gasped, a chill running down her spine. I always thought marriage was forever, just once in a lifetime. I used to judge those who divorced, and now something similar is happening in my own life. Exactly why I've never rushed into marriage, Kate mused. You never truly know if you're getting a good man or not. Right, Amelia agreed, a sad, knowing smile on her face. Well, I'm going to bed. I'll think more about divorce and all that other stuff. Good night. Good night, sweetie. Amelia didn't know that David had overheard part of her conversation. His night shift had been unexpectedly cancelled, and he had returned home without warning, slipping in quietly. The word divorce pierced him like a sudden, brutal sentence. David refused to believe that Amelia was truly contemplating tearing their family apart, leaving him. Why? He replayed the question endlessly in his mind, but found no answer. He'd considered their cooling affection merely a temporary rough patch, nothing to truly worry about. Doesn't every couple have their disagreements? As the old saying went, lovers' quarrels are soon mended. Marriage wasn't a perpetual honeymoon after all. Conflicts were inevitable. Not everything always went smoothly. Listening to her conversation from the darkened hallway, he couldn't believe his ears. Later, after she hung up, he quietly opened the front door and slipped back outside, not wanting to reveal his presence. Let her think he knew nothing of her plans. He wandered aimlessly through the quiet night streets for hours, his mind churning, heavy thoughts refusing to settle, like
clumsy, unyielding concrete blocks tumbling around in his skull. Finally, a stark conclusion formed. Amelia must be seeing someone else. What else could possibly drive a woman to divorce? Only another man with whom she planned to build a new life. And they would live, of course, in that inherited cottage. Where else? He tried to construct a logical sequence of events. First, Amelia inherited the house and stubbornly refused to sell it, even though they had diligently saved for a mortgage for 4 years. This meant she didn't truly care about that mortgage anymore. She didn't want to have children, most likely because she saw no future in their current marriage. And if she saw no future with David, then she must see one with someone else. A sudden, scorching flame seemed to ignite within him, burning his heart, rising in a furious, boiling wave. So that was her plan, and he, like a fool, had still held on to hope, dreamed of a complete family. David sank onto a park bench, pressing his fingers against his throbbing temples. No, he wouldn't let her go so easily. He had to devise something, a plan for revenge. In the morning he returned home as if nothing were amiss. He made breakfast, showered. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, the endless circular thoughts having drained him completely. All he wanted was to sleep. He stumbled into the bedroom, collapsed onto the bed, and instantly fell into a deep, dreamless slumber. When he awoke, Amelia had already left for work. David brewed himself a strong cup of coffee, then drifted through the empty apartment, lost in his thoughts. If yesterday had been consumed by anger and a thirst for revenge, now a bitter melancholy had settled in their place. And when she finally returned home from work that evening, she walked in and, without preamble, immediately brought up the subject of divorce. "I just feel like we've grown into different people, David," she stated, her gaze carefully averted from his, fixed on a point somewhere in the distance. "Our paths simply don't align anymore. We're not right for each other." David's lips felt parched. "Why have you decided this?" he managed, his voice catching, but he pressed on. "You always wanted a family, children, to grow old together. Do you remember saying all that when we were by the ocean?" She shook her head slowly, sinking onto the ottoman and slipping off her heels. "I remember, but back then I didn't truly know you. Mum was right, we should have just lived together first, really understood each other, before rushing headlong into marriage." "Headlong?" David scoffed, a bitter edge in his voice. "Meaning you didn't even know who you were marrying?" Amelia's head snapped up so sharply that the delicate earrings in her lobes seemed to dance with furious energy. "Why wouldn't I know? I did. I just didn't know who you really were. You seemed so different then." "And how, precisely, did I seem different?" David pressed, a mocking tone creeping in. "I don't know, just different. For instance, I never imagined you'd be so relentlessly insistent on immediately dividing my inheritance." David sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair, a gesture of exasperation. "Ah, you're back to that." "Yes, David, I am. It all began with that house. You haven't been yourself since." "But you wanted an apartment," David shouted, his voice suddenly raw with frustration. "You said so yourself, and selling that house is the best option. Sell it and finally buy that damn apartment." Amelia paled, recoiling slightly. "Don't you dare yell at me." "I'm not yelling." "Then what do you call this? Calm conversation? Is an apartment so important to you that you're willing to sell off a tangible memory of my grandmother? I understand she meant nothing to you, but I loved her very much." "Keep a souvenir of her then," David retorted, his voice tight. "A book, some trinket. I saw she had plenty of those. Anything. But a house? That's real estate. Right, Amelia countered with biting sarcasm. And it's my real estate. Inherited, which you legally have no claim to. That's what's truly eating at you, isn't it? She pierced him with a steely gaze, clenching her jaw. What's eating at me is that you've decided to divorce me. Amelia, not your house. David yelled back, his face flushed. And I think it's precisely my house, Amelia concluded, her voice unwavering. They found no common ground, no path to reconciliation. Amelia became increasingly certain that her husband was, at heart, a small-minded and avaricious man, coveting her modest inheritance. David, on the other hand, saw his wife as a betrayer, someone whose head had been completely turned by a few inherited square feet, even if they were out in the country. Perhaps she had found another man after gaining the property, or even before, which seemed more likely to him. That would explain her stubborn refusal to sell. Then she'd have no secret meeting place for her lover. Good heavens, he mused bitterly to himself. How could I have been so blind, so foolish, not to see this before? David offered a sad, knowing chuckle. Because I loved her, that's why. I loved her and I trusted her. So, will you grant me a divorce? Amelia asked, her voice quiet but resolute. Will it truly be better for both of us? Yes, David replied after a brief, heavy pause, the word a stark pronouncement. And then a dark thought curled in his mind. No, he couldn't just let her go. He had to seek retribution, inflict the same pain on her that she was inflicting on him. But how? Stalking her, searching for a secret lover, monitoring her phone and messages. It felt too pathetic. No, he needed to act with more cruelty. A few days later, David drove a 5-gallon gas can to Amelia's grandmother's cottage. You cherish those memories of your grandmother, my love? He sneered through clenched teeth, hiding the can discreetly behind a tool shed on the property. I'll take that memory away from you. Only charred timbers will remain. Just what you deserve for how you've cheated on me. A few days later, David drove a 5-gallon gas can to Amelia's grandmother's cottage. You cherish those memories of your grandmother, my love, he sneered through clenched teeth, hiding the can discreetly behind a tool shed on the property. I'll take that memory away from you. Only charred timbers will remain. Just what you deserve for how you've cheated on me. He decided to set the fire on the very day their divorce would be finalised, their last legal connection severed. Amelia would undoubtedly rush straight to the cottage afterward. Where else would she go? He would have to get there before her to ensure she wasn't harmed in the blaze. His revenge was for her loss, not her physical harm. He wasn't wrong in his prediction. A week before the divorce was even final, Amelia had quietly packed her belongings and moved to the cottage, seeking solace. That morning he ate breakfast calmly, scrolled through online news, watched a little television, feigning normalcy. Time crawled by, each hour stretching into 3, and he couldn't bear to wait any longer. He got dressed, his movements deliberate, and drove towards the county courthouse. Amelia arrived, looking utterly spent. Her auburn hair was pulled back into a hasty, messy bun, and she wore a soft, oversized hoodie with worn jeans and sneakers. "Hey," she said, settling onto the bench beside him. "How are things?" "Things are nothing," David mumbled, irritation colouring his tone, his eyes fixed on his phone. "Why do you care, anyway?" "No reason," Amelia shrugged, a weary sigh escaping her. "Just being polite." "You can stick your politeness where the sun don't shine," David snapped, his voice tight. He turned sharply to face her, his gaze locking onto hers. Amelia, in about half an hour, we're going to be divorced. Just tell me honestly, is there someone else? On the side?
No.
Was there?
No.
Then why? We planned so much. We never even took that second trip to the ocean. You wanted it so badly. And now you're just going to throw it all away? Amelia sighed, a deep, tired sound pressing her palms together between her knees, looking at him with a pleading gaze.
David, I did want those things, but sometimes a desire just burns out. You understand? Why are you torturing me with these questions?
I'm not torturing you. I'm trying to understand why.
Because you pulled away from me. You became cold, distant. I can't live like that, like a roommate. I want warmth. I want love.
See? David scoffed, a bitter smile twisting his lips. That's because you found someone else.
I didn't find anyone else, Amelia flared, her eyes widening in disbelief. What phone call? I don't understand.
That night, when I was supposed to be on my last night shift, who were you talking to about divorce?
Amelia didn't have a chance to answer. Their names were called. The divorce was granted quickly. There was no shared property to divide, no children to consider, nothing to haggle over. It was over. After the proceedings, David approached his now ex-wife, extending a hand.
Congratulations, he said, a cutting sarcasm in his tone. You're free now.
Amelia met his handshake briefly, her expression unreadable.
Where are you headed now? Home?
David asked, feigning casualness. Does it truly matter to you? Amelia countered. No, not home. I'm meeting Kate at a cafe. We're going to celebrate.
Good luck. Have a good time. David exited the building, seething with a sense of righteous, or so he thought, anger. He hailed a taxi through an app. Lucky for him, the nearest one was only about a mile away.
Amelia followed him out, walking purposefully along the sidewalk. David watched her figure disappear into the bustling city crowds. The taxi arrived and David jumped into the back seat, giving the driver the address. The driver steered silently, while David's mind raced, turning his plan over and over. He mentally rehearsed each step, checking for the lighter in his pocket. The anger and resentment didn't subside. Instead, they fueled him, convincing him of the rightness of his intended act. How else could he make her pay? The gate to the cottage, as always, was unlatched. David walked swiftly to the backyard, found the jerry can hidden in the shed, checked its contents, and walked back towards the house. With a furious tug, he wrenched open the cap and splashed gasoline several times against the weathered, white-painted wall, stepping back and splashing again. Tiny beads of sweat appeared on his forehead, and he nervously wiped them away with his palm. He pulled out his lighter, flicked the wheel several times, striking sparks. A thin yellow flame flickered, trembling, sputtering to life. He held the lighter, poised to ignite the destruction. The smell of gasoline was sharp, acrid in the late afternoon air. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer force of the anger coursing through him. This was it, the moment he had been planning, the retribution he felt he deserved. But as the small flame danced, something shifted within him. He saw Amelia's face, not as it had been in the courthouse, cold and distant, but as it was by the ocean, her eyes wide with wonder, laughing as the dolphins leaped.
He remembered her boundless joy, her unwavering belief in their future, the warmth of her hand in his. He saw his grandmother-in-law, a kind gentlewoman who had opened her house and heart to him without hesitation. He remembered the quiet dignity of her little cottage, filled with a lifetime of memories, not just for Amelia, but for her mother, and perhaps even future generations. The small, flickering flame suddenly felt too heavy, too immense. It wasn't just a fire he was about to start. It was an act that would consume not just wooden paint, but every last shred of his own decency. His hand lowered, slowly at first, then with a sudden, decisive jerk. The flame winked out. He stood there, panting slightly, the jerry-can still in his grasp, the smell of gasoline thick around him. The rage had not vanished, but something else, a chilling emptiness, had taken its place. What was he doing? What kind of man was he becoming? He looked at the house, a simple old cottage, and felt a profound weariness settle over him, heavier than any anger. He turned away from the house, leaving the can on the ground, and walked back towards the gate, each step heavier than the last. He had lost his wife, and, in his rage, he had almost lost himself completely. 2 years had passed since that day. 2 years of David slowly, painfully picking up the shattered pieces of himself. The jagged wounds in his heart had begun to heal, but slowly leaving behind deep scars that still ached. He'd thrown himself into work, into anything that could distract him from the crushing silence of his apartment and the torment of his thoughts. He yearned to reach out to Amelia, to call, to text, but a stubborn pride, mixed with the raw pain of her rejection, held him back. If she had cast him out, he reasoned, he couldn't debase himself by trying to crawl back in. He avoided her social media, terrified of seeing another man, of confronting the unbearable truth that she might be happy without him. But even work eventually lost its power to numb the pain. He burned out, each workday becoming an arduous task. His boss, noticing his decline, called him in. "Things are that bad, huh?" he asked gently. "That bad," David nodded, his voice hollow. "Then take an indefinite leave. Go somewhere. We'll manage without you for a while." After a moment of hesitation, David agreed. The next day, he bought a plane ticket to a coastal town. It was only when he was back home, looking at the departure date, that he realized it was exactly 2 years since their divorce. A bitter, self-deprecating laugh escaped him. Yes, it was time to put himself back together. Time to start a new life. How much longer could he drag out this miserable existence? The seaside town greeted him with air shimmering with a scorching haze and the invigorating scent of the salty sea breeze. David settled into a hotel right on the beachfront. Each morning after drinking his coffee in the open-air courtyard, he would head straight to the beach. The gentle rush of the waves and the distant cries of the seagulls soothed his frayed nerves, slowly bringing order to his chaotic thoughts. Life wasn't over. He had simply turned another chapter. Now it was time to open a new one, and he would start it here, on the sunny coast. He lazily rose from his beach chair, stretching muscles stiff from lying still for too long. The sun was directly overhead. David gathered his few belongings, tossed his towel over his shoulder, and walked unhurriedly towards the hotel. Getting sunburned on the beach under the blazing sun held no appeal. The hottest part of the day was best spent in his room. He could return to the beach in the evening. As David walked along the paved path toward the hotel entrance, he suddenly came face to face with Amelia. David froze in astonishment. Remarkable, isn't it? Never once had they accidentally run into each other in their hometown, where everyone knew everyone, and you saw familiar faces 5 times a day, yet here they were, thousands of miles away. He instinctively checked for the familiar pang of pain, but his heart beat surprisingly steadily and calmly. "Amelia," he called out. "Hello. Are you here on holiday too?" She turned, nodded with a smile that was polite but held no warmth, and headed to the receptionist. The next morning they met again, this time on the beach. Amelia chose a lounge chair right next to David's. They sat in silence for a long time. David had no desire to speak at all. He listened to an audiobook through his headphones, the peaceful sound of the waves faintly audible even through the music. Amelia diligently applied sunscreen, and occasionally David would glance at her from the corner of his eye. The beach was still largely deserted, the long rows of lounge chairs completely empty. Why did she choose to sit right next to him? He mused inwardly. No, he wouldn't for a second think she wanted to reconcile, to start over. They didn't speak a word that day. In truth, there wasn't much left for them to discuss anyway. No conversation started the following day either, even though Amelia again chose a spot right beside David. "Amelia," David couldn't take it any more on the 3rd day. "Are you deliberately sitting right here?" "What?" She looked up at him. "Am I bothering you?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back, turning her head away. She hastily gathered her belongings into her canvas bag, jumped up, and almost ran away, her strides wide and determined. David exhaled. Maybe he had offended her, but he had come here to relax, to forget, to distract himself. How could he do that if his ex-wife was constantly appearing before his eyes? The next day, he decided not to go to the beach. Instead, he ventured into town, looking for souvenirs and gifts for family and friends. He ambled leisurely through the narrow streets, peeking into small shops filled with trinkets. He then paused to listen to a street musician. A young man, perhaps 20 years old, skillfully strummed his guitar. A sad melody flowed from his slender fingers. David even sat down on a bench nearby. A young woman stopped, dropping some small change into the open black guitar case. David also tossed in a few smaller banknotes. "You have talent," he told the musician. "I totally agree," said the young woman, squinting in the sun. David turned back. She was still standing nearby, listening as the music began again. "Would you care for something refreshing to drink?" David asked, surprising himself with the sudden invitation. "It's hot out," the young woman smiled. "Perhaps." In a resort town, new acquaintances were surprisingly easy to make. An hour later, David and Eleanor were chatting animatedly, like old friends reuniting on the sun-dappled veranda of a charming little cafe. Eleanor, he learned, lived a few states away in a vibrant college town. She was visiting her sister, who had just welcomed her first baby, a precious little boy. "I really wanted to help her," Eleanor explained, her voice warm with affection. "She's completely worn out. Even though I haven't had children myself, I can only imagine how truly exhausting it must be. So I'm spending time with her little one, giving her a chance to rest, to actually sleep." "Are you married, Eleanor?" David asked, then quickly added, as if an afterthought, "Just curious, you know." "No," she laughed, a bright, clear sound. "Too early for marriage for me. I just turned 25 last month." "Happy belated birthday," David offered. "I, on the other hand, was married by 22. "You're married?" she asked, a hint of upset in her tone. David shook his head. "No, I'm divorced. I was married. Would you like to hear the story of how that all fell apart?" Eleanor nodded, her eyes wide with interest. David recounted the story vividly, sprinkling in unexpected moments of wry humour. Eleanor laughed, her clear hazel eyes sparkling with amusement. The main thing is that you couldn't have really set the fire, she said, her voice thoughtful. Well, you'd be surprised. I once, after an unfaithful boyfriend, cut up all his clothes with scissors, literally everything down to his belts, so he had nothing to even walk to the store in. Petty, yes, but oh, the satisfaction I felt. They continued to spend time together for the remainder of David's vacation. Eleanor often joined him at the hotel beach, and they would sunbathe, chatting about everything and nothing. It was surprisingly easy and peaceful with her, even in silence. There was no agonizing effort to conjure topics for conversation. Words simply flowed, effortlessly, from one thought to the next. Amelia, meanwhile, stubbornly maintained her distant facade, pointedly ignoring both David and his new companion. One afternoon, with a subtle nod towards Amelia, David mentioned her to Eleanor. "That's her, my ex-wife, sitting over there." Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise. She turned quickly, glanced at Amelia, then just as swiftly turned back. "Why did she come all the way here?" she whispered. "I have no idea. Just a coincidence, I suppose." "This feels like anything but," Eleanor whispered, and David laughed, a genuine, hearty sound. "No, Eleanor, it truly is a coincidence, or simply chance, if that's easier to accept. I highly doubt she tracked my plans. You know, life sometimes throws up these utterly astonishing coincidences, or rather, sheer chance encounters." Eleanor smiled. "I'm just teasing, but honestly, you truly don't know what women are capable of when they decide to win back an ex. Anything, practically anything. And for some reason, I just have a strong feeling that she actually does want you back. It's that women's intuition. I noticed her the moment I saw her. She was looking at you with such intensity, I immediately thought she was interested." "I just assumed she was jealous," David countered. "Possessiveness, you know." On the eve of David's departure, they spent the entire day together. Neither of them wanted the day to end, and through all their usually easy-going conversations, a thread of undeniable sadness was woven. Eleanor often fell silent, gazing out at the shimmering expanse of the ocean. David, too, found himself lost in his thoughts. "I've truly enjoyed spending time with you," Eleanor confessed, her voice soft. "I don't want you to leave." "And I don't want you to leave either," David admitted, the words heavy with genuine regret. "What are we going to do?" "I simply can't pack up and follow you," David said, a mirroring sadness in his tone, "because my life, my responsibilities are in my city." "Let's text and call each other," Eleanor suggested, her voice a hopeful whisper. And indeed, they connected through video calls, but it wasn't the same. David yearned to feel her near, to see her eyes and her smile without the screen as a barrier. He had never encountered anyone quite like her, a woman whose voice could make something tremble and break free deep inside him. Perhaps this was the feeling people called butterflies. David didn't know. He only knew that, even with Amelia, he had never felt anything remotely similar. Eleanor was truly special. "I bought a ticket," she announced one evening during one of their video calls. "Can you find me a hotel? Just something affordable. My budget's pretty tight." David was taken aback. "But wait, we didn't discuss you coming to visit?" "Are you opposed to it, David?" she asked, a teasing lilt in her voice. No, I'm not opposed at all," David stammered, flustered. "It's just unexpected." So, Eleanor entered his life with the same effortless grace with which she did everything. It simply happened, quite naturally, that he ended up moving in with her in that apartment, and he didn't need a single day to adjust to this new person in his life. It was as if she had always been there. Eleanor simply arrived and effortlessly filled the empty space meant for her. David never ceased to marvel at it. He had always been told that relationships will work, hard labour, that they need constant effort to stay afloat. It turned out that wasn't necessarily true. His relationship with Eleanor simply unfolded, beautiful and natural. Then Amelia's call came unexpectedly on one of those long, melancholy autumn evenings. She spoke vaguely about feelings, about a desire to rekindle their relationship, about how she had long ago forgiven him. David listened, not interrupting, letting her words hang in the air like fallen leaves. "Amelia, why are you calling?" He asked gently when she finally finished her monologue. "It's been 2 years. Did you honestly think I'd be sitting around waiting for your call all this time?" Silence hung heavy on the line. "You have someone else, don't you? I'm right?" "Yes, Amelia, I have someone else." "Is it that woman from the coast?" "What difference does it make?" David replied, a hint of irritation creeping into his voice. "Amelia, when I was hurting, when I was tormented by your decision to divorce, you didn't seem particularly troubled by it, and you certainly didn't want to fix anything then. Why do you want to now?" "I realised I made a mistake." "And I realised I made a mistake too," David said, his voice firm but without malice. "Let's just end it here. I don't want to stir up the past." He ended the call, then paused, considering. After the wedding, the newlyweds decided to live in David's newly purchased apartment. He had finally saved enough for a down payment on a mortgage and had just closed on a small 2-bedroom place with a cosy kitchen and a tiny balcony. For a young couple starting out, it was an absolutely perfect fit. Eleanor liked the apartment too. "But I'll miss the ocean," she often said. "I'll probably go back frequently. It's where I grew up, after all. My little slice of home. It feels so strange living without the sea nearby." David agreed. Why shouldn't they visit? Especially since she owned a modest 1-bedroom apartment in a new development there, inherited from a beloved aunt. Eleanor had initially suggested they live there, but David had demurred. He had a good job in his hometown. Finding similar opportunities elsewhere would be difficult. "Then we should sell that apartment," Eleanor reasoned. "Why let it sit empty?" "That's your decision to make," David replied, a chuckle escaping him. "You know, I don't want to have anything to do with my wife's inheritance any more. If you sell it, you won't have anywhere to go when you miss the ocean. Let it be like our summer cottage, our little coastal retreat." "That's reasonable too," Eleanor nodded, a soft smile spreading across her face. A week after the ceremony, one day, David's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. An unfamiliar number. He answered with a casual, "Hello?" "David, it's Amelia. I heard about your wedding," she said, her voice a little hesitant. "Through a mutual friend, Sarah. Congratulations." There was a brittle edge to her congratulations, a subtle strain. "Thank you," David replied, keeping his voice even. "It was a wonderful day." A brief silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the distant hum of city traffic outside David's window. "So," Amelia continued, her voice gaining a surprising confidence, "I guess you're living in that apartment now, the one you bought?" "Yes, we are," David confirmed. "And you're happy?" The question hung in the air, a thinly veiled accusation or perhaps a desperate search for confirmation. "Yes, Amelia, I am very happy," he stated, allowing a touch of warmth to enter his voice, not to gloat, but to simply convey the truth. "Eleanor and I are building a beautiful life together." Another pause, then Amelia's tone shifted, becoming almost wistful. "You know, Grandmother's house, it actually did burn down." David felt a cold jolt, a memory of the gasoline can, the unlit flame. "What? It burned?" he blurted out, a visceral reaction. "Yes, it did," she confirmed, a strange detachment in her voice. "But it was under new owners by then. I sold it about a year after our divorce. Someone must have fallen asleep with a cigarette." David shook his head, though she couldn't see it. "I'm sorry to hear that. But how did you finally bring yourself to sell the house? I thought it was your sacred memory of your grandmother." "It was," she admitted, "but I desperately needed a large sum of money very quickly, so I sold it, and quite successfully too." She smiled faintly, a distant echo of her old self. "And I don't regret it. You were right back then. The past needs to stay in the past." David and Eleanor had chosen the serene, breathtaking beauty of the Pacific Northwest for their honeymoon. Neither of them had ever been there, and the majestic mountains meeting the wild, rugged coastline stole their breath away. David spent much of his time reflecting, analysing his past, and envisioning their future. He truly believed that his second marriage was a match truly blessed. His first, he now understood, had been a necessary step, a challenging lesson, thankfully not a catastrophic one. He mentally offered a quiet gratitude that everything had unfolded exactly as it had, leading him to this moment, to Eleanor. Amelia never reappeared in his life after that phone call. Mutual acquaintances occasionally mentioned that she had remarried and moved somewhere out west, to a quiet town nestled on the shores of Puget Sound. Fate had truly scattered them to different ends of the country, their lives diverging completely. David realised that perhaps this wasn't just happenstance. They weren't meant to be together. They shouldn't have even crossed paths in the first place. Their relationship had been a mere coincidence, a twist of fate, a fleeting storm. He understood this clearly now that Eleanor, his true kindred spirit, had entered his life. She was the woman who was always meant to be there. As they began packing to return home from their honeymoon, one morning she bewilderedly showed him a pregnancy test with 2 distinct lines. His heart plummeted somewhere into the abyss, then soared with a joy so profound it almost buckled his knees. "Do you want a boy or a girl?" he asked, shaking his head slightly, trying to quell a sudden ringing in his ears. "A girl," Eleanor answered, her voice soft with wonder. "Then I want a girl too," David declared, his voice thick with emotion. They continued packing their suitcases as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "I still want to go souvenir shopping," Eleanor said in a matter-of-fact tone, "and take one last walk by the lake. What time is our flight again, do you remember?" 11 in the evening. "Then we have plenty of time." She zipped the long zipper on her bag. "It's so beautiful here. I never imagined places like this existed." "Yes, I loved it too. Maybe we could have breakfast outside." David found himself wondering, why are we talking so much about mundane things? Eleanor had placed the test on the dresser. He stood and picked it up again, the 2 lines of promise. "And what will we name her if it's a girl? My grandmother always hoped for a daughter named Hope." "And what if it's a son?" Eleanor confidently shook her head. "I have a strong intuition. It will be a daughter. I just know it." David pulled her close and gently kissed her cheek. "You're my oracle." She looked intently into his eyes. Do you ever want children?" "I do," David answered simply, profoundly. He hadn't truly, deeply considered them before, not even when he'd mentioned wanting a child to Amelia. But now, with Eleanor, he knew with absolute certainty. He wanted this child, and Eleanor was precisely the woman with whom he wanted to spend the rest of his life.